Hi, I'm CG Sophie. 4 months ago, I started working on my animated short film Run Rabbit. Created entirely in Blender, it's a 2.5 minute film about a mama rabbit who accidentally gets herself trapped in a cage. Her little kit needs to think clearly and figure out how the cage works in time to free his mum before they get caught by an approaching hunter. Please check it out if you have the chance. The link is in the description. I started self-learning 3D about a year ago, starting of course with the classic Blender Guru Donut tutorial, then working through my own modeling projects, doing an animation course with CG Cookie, and then making a 45-second short scene called Rivet and Fluffball using assets from CG Cookie and Blender Studio as the character models. This was a great exercise, but I wanted to make a real short film where I created all the characters myself from scratch. So before writing the script, I wrote a document defining the goals of the project, namely that the film be a couple of minutes long, I create the original characters myself, and it tells a complete dramatic story. My ultimate goal is to make animated films about animals, so I started brainstorming ideas in that vein that could work for a short film. I quickly hit upon the idea of an animal being trapped and escaping, as it was something that could be told very quickly and have high stakes and emotion. I didn't want the story to come across as moralistic or as a statement on the ethics of trapping wild rabbits in real life, because I know that's a complicated issue in different countries, but I thought escaping a trap provided a compelling focus for a short film. I decided to use a cage as opposed to other more brutal methods of trapping because I felt it was more palatable, more visually interesting, and getting out of it was more like solving a puzzle. I decided that the mum would be trapped and her child would rescue her because I think making it a family story raises the emotional stakes. I also liked the idea of the flipped dynamic of having the kid save the parent when we usually see it the other way around. And if the kid was going to save the day, I wanted them to be a smart cookie who ultimately thinks their way through the problem and solves it by using a tool. And I decided to set the story in a kind of timeless, idyllic European forest environment. Prior to this project, I had never created, rigged, and animated a character from scratch, so that was clearly going to be the biggest challenge. I decided to spend some time up front creating a test rabbit as a proof of concept to define the look and basic design aesthetic. As you can see, the test rabbit looks very different to the production model. I created a pure ref board of rabbit reference, including real rabbits and other CG and cartoon rabbits. I wanted to humanize the face, of course, so they could have a human range of expression, but not stylize the characters too much. I wanted a character design aesthetic that was kinda halfway between Pixar and realistic. In order to get my head around the underlying anatomy, I looked at a lot of rabbit, cat, and dog skulls and kind of figured out how to merge them to create the anatomy of a rabbit with forward-facing eyes. To sculpt the character, I bought a base mesh as a starting point, but basically ended up resculpting everything from scratch to suit my needs. For the retopology, I did CG Cookie's course to learn how to use ReTopoFlow. You can do retopology in native Blender, but ReTopoFlow has some amazing tools that make the process so much easier. Even with this add-on, it took the best part of a day to do a character, so I dread to think how long it would take placing down literally every single polygon in native Blender. Now my test rabbit had nice topology and edge loops in places that I knew it had to deform. Then came the hardest part, the fur. I really wanted to try out the new hair curve system in Blender as opposed to the old particle system. The only issue is that there aren't a lot of online resources for the new system and nothing for doing like a full animal fur groom. So there's a steep learning curve involved. The essence of creating fur or hair in 3D is that we create guide curves and then create a node tree that instructs Blender how to interpolate those guide curves into the full system, how dense it should be, how it should clump, length variation, etc. We also weight paint masks that are used to define certain parameters as well. Fur on an animal is incredibly complex and varied, so it took a while for me to get my head around how to even approach it. I ended up separating it into about 25 completely different fur systems that are merged together. These systems all have their own density masks, guide curves, and node trees. For the rigging, I had to teach myself how to use Rigify using the amazing YouTube tutorials by CG Dive. Setting up the rig with Rigify is quite straightforward, but weight painting every single joint and making sure they're deforming well can be finicky and time consuming. I now had my rigged test model with fur. It was time to do some animation testing. I did an admittedly fairly janky hop cycle, and then I got my partner Alex to be the reference for a 2-second facial animation. This little 2-second test, imperfect as it is, gave me the confidence that this project might actually work. I'd spent about 7 weeks learning the skills to get to this point, and it was now time to really start making my movie Run Rabbit. I created the 2 rabbit characters in parallel, because I felt they would be defined as much by the contrast between them as by their individual features. I deviated a lot from the design of the test rabbit because I wanted to express character better. I wanted the mum to feel more wearied and concerned, like she'd seen a lot in her time, and I wanted Kit to be bright-eyed and new to the world. I discovered that to make a character look more childlike, you have to bring the eyes, nose, and mouth closer together. As soon as I did this with Kit, the character just suddenly started feeling right. The eyes were free assets released by TinyNocky that have a bunch of different sliders that you can use to change the characteristics. The idea of giving Kit different coloured eyes was an unexpected spur-of-the-moment decision, inspired by the fact that I just adopted a Turkish van cat who often have this trait in real life. But I thought it would subconsciously imply out-of-the-box thinking in Kit, which is his defining character trait. I did a separate retopology on both characters, and then moved on to doing separate fur grooms from scratch for each rabbit, using the same methodology used for the test rabbit. Both characters ended up having around 2.5 million individual hairs. There was no way I could preview the whole fur simulation in the viewport. On my poor laptop, I could only ever preview like 2.5% without any serious lag. So the only way to really see what it looked like was to do renders in cycles. A render may take a few minutes per render, so the process of checking and refining could be quite time consuming. The fur coloration is driven by a black and white texture that I painted, which is plugged into a shader node setup. It was important the coloration be distinct between the 2 characters, but also immediately communicated familial connection. I was trying to imply a mother-child relationship, but it's not as easy as you'd think to communicate gender in a semi-anatomically realistic character. But I gave her some nice lashes, and hopefully people can intuit that she's a mother. Once I finished the fur, I actually baked all the geometry nodes into real geometry. Without having to do all the node calculations, it was much more performative in the viewport. The final thing I did was create the teeth and gums and do some basic texture painting in Blender. The models were again rigged with Rigify, and I did some basic testing and was ready to start animating. I also did some test environment renders. I'll talk more about the lighting later, but the environment scatter was done with geoscatter assets. However, I realized there wasn't high fidelity enough dirt in the Blender marketplace for a project like mine where the camera is so close to the ground the whole time. So I ended up having to create my own geometry nodes to generate the dirt, which basically involved a scatter of rocks that I modeled, as well as some of the geoscatter twigs and leaves. I created a high density, medium density, and low density dirt scatter system for areas that are closer and further away from the camera. I modeled the cage from online reference, making sure that all the mechanisms were fitting together so that the door could open and close realistically. And now, I was ready to start animating. The layout was my first pass at blocking the shots out. As you can see, it's got no real animation and no environment. It's extremely basic, but the shots are pretty accurate to the final result. I recruited my life partner Alex and my best friend Steph to provide acting reference. We spent half a day acting the whole film out. I really wanted to be able to study the nuances of their facial performance. I probably stuck to their performance for half the shots and then riffed on their performance on other shots as well. But the reference was a crucial guide to have for the animation. For the body movement, I referenced a lot of YouTube clips and rabbit documentaries, but I also ended up just making a lot of stuff up as well. And then I started animating shot by shot. My goal was to animate 1 second per hour, and I stayed roughly on that schedule, although the film turned out to be about 50 seconds longer than anticipated. The animation was done without any environment other than the cage, and I previewed it in this rendered viewport form, without fur or anything fancy. My partner Alex gave me valuable feedback on every single shot. There are 50 shots in total in Run Rabbit. There's nothing fancy about the animation, it's just about putting in the hours and getting it done. I'd learnt a lot from the animation bootcamp on CG Cookie, but I know I have a lot of room for improvement. Nevertheless, I was just trusting my instincts and doing my best. I think the animation actually improves throughout the film, so hopefully that bodes well for future projects. After a month of full-time solid animating, I now had a full edit of Hairless Rabbits. I did the shots of the hunter at the end. I modeled the jacket from scratch, bought some boot assets, and modeled some of the rifle myself, but added the scope from a Blender kit asset. My philosophy is you create what you need and you blend existing assets from the community to create something new. In the same way that if you were doing live action, you'd build what you need and then you'd source what's available. I only created the back of the hunter and then created a simple Rigify rig, just enough to get the shots we needed. Using the rendered viewport edited timeline, I did a music edit using royalty-free stock music. My partner Alex is a professional sound designer, so I was able to hand the sound completely over to him while I focused on the lighting and rendering. We were completely on the same page and he did a wonderful job. He performed all the rabbit vocals himself, and I think he did a great job giving the two characters distinctive sound qualities. And I loved the hyperbolic cage sounds he created. We wanted the sound to be a bit larger than life, as if from a rabbit's perspective. Meanwhile, I was doing the lighting. The deep backgrounds are actually completely separate from the foregrounds and are composited together. The foregrounds are lit with big spotlights with gobos to create the dappled light, whereas the backgrounds are backlit with a single sunlight through volumetric smoke, and then they're composited together in the final shots. So the lighting setups are radically different for the foreground and background, but I think the transitions between the two are seamless, which just goes to show that things don't necessarily have to look real to look real. Both characters have two soft area lights on them the whole time, as well as an eye light. I used Blender's new light linking feature so that the lights only affect the character that they're meant to. As you would in live action, I made sure to always keep the characters in shade, apart from a few times when they move through light pools. The lighting and rendering turned out to be a big task. I made the whole film on my laptop, but there was no way I was going to be able to complete all the rendering, which requires over 64 gigabytes of RAM and takes like 10 minutes per frame. I uploaded everything to Garage Farm Render Farm, who are fantastic. I ended up spending about 1,400 Oz dollars or about 820 USD on the rendering, which was by far the biggest expense on the project. Most of the time when I got a shot back, it required at least one revision, so it was a finicky process, but it was so exciting to actually be getting finished shots in. It was about 2 weeks full-time lighting and rendering, gradually getting finished shots and adding them to the timeline and making tweaks. And then, the film was done! Inclusive of the R&D phase, I'd spent 4 months full-time making Run Rabbit. I'm really proud of how much I've learnt on this project. I know it's far from perfect, but I'm proud of the character and emotion that's coming across, and it's a really exciting springboard for the future. On my next project, I really want to improve the rigging and animation. I know I have a lot to learn, and I'm keen to go back and study some of the fundamentals of body mechanics and facial animation. I also want to improve my rigging to be able to get far more animal flexibility. I feel like my rigs were quite traditional, and I really couldn't get the deformations that a real rabbit would be able to have. I also want to improve my texturing. The cage has a procedural texture applied across the whole thing, but if I was starting again, I'd like to be more thoughtful about where the rust and edge wear was applied. I was very lucky to be in a financial position to be able to work full-time on a passion project for 4 months, but that's unlikely to be the case indefinitely. These shots take a long time to complete, so I'm going to need to think seriously about sensible time management moving forward. Overall, I'm proud of the film and believe it meets the goals that I set out to achieve. Thank you so much for watching this little making of, and it would mean a lot if you could check out the film at the link in the description, leave a comment and subscribe. I'd also genuinely appreciate any feedback on how you think I can improve my skills. I hope you have a beautiful day. Thank you.